You burn my gates down, that's fine. I'll turn it into a profit and make sure and make sure it goes back at you twice as hard. I'm just a normal bloke. Why do I have to wrap myself up in barbed wire?
Have you ever thought about walking away from it all when
It's
it
not an
gets too
option.
much?
It's not an option. And he died in my arms. I was completely unprepared for it. And then I was suicidal. When fish got run over, it was even the sort of chain of events that led up to it on the day. It was like you'd written unfortunately, the perfect tragedy. And he died in my arms. I was completely unprepared for it. I was massively in love with this dog. That dog was holding my world together. Other aspects of the world were out of my control, but I was able to manage it because of the relationship that I had with that animal. That was enough security for me to be able to keep going, trying to deal with this, this, and this, and this. All of a sudden, that just vanished instantaneously, bled to death in my arms. I had no preparation to be able to deal with that. And then I was suicidal. It was a decision made. I mean, the reason I didn't take my life was because I didn't have enough pills. That's what it came down to. And then I was so scared in the aftermath of that that I went to my GP, and I've been to my GP on quite a few occasions, explaining my mental health difficulties, and he just said, "Look, this is it. You've got to get help. Here are your options." And I was fortunate enough to be able to pay. Um, and I went into a series of therapy sessions that lasted 3 years. And it was off the back of that, to conclude that process, that I got the autism diagnosis. That period of therapy was really tough. And I didn't think it was going to be. I thought it was just conversations. And it started like that. It was just like me sat on a sofa talking. And then within a few weeks or months, sometimes I would come out, and I remember there was something about the pavement. I don't know what it was, but I could get across the sort of forecourt of where I would go. But when I got to the pavement, something would happen. And I remember stepping onto that pavement once, and it was like I got hit by a train. Or it was like I was winded. I could barely breathe, because of what I suppose everything that was coming out, and it had been locked up for so long. And the reason I was going through it is because I didn't want to get back to that point where I was ever going to be sat on the floor counting the pills again. You know, I, and I just sort of thought, if I go through this, maybe I can sort things out. Maybe I can build a framework, because I knew I was going to have more dogs. I knew they were going to die. It could have been humans. It could have been anything. It was just dogs. There was going to be another trauma in my life, and I didn't want to be in the same position. Unfortunately, during the course of that, um, I started to spend quite a lot of time in a house overseas, and there was, like, on my own there for quite long periods of time. And on another occasion, I came very close to killing myself. Then, and what kept me alive were the dogs. I just looked down and I thought, I can't leave them.
And that was despite having going through this therapy.
Yeah, it was quite towards the start of it. I wasn't at a stage where I think I'd acquired any sort of strength or understanding from it. I was still in the difficult stage of that. It got to the point whereby I thought sometimes it was probably doing more harm than good. But I'm quite dogged with those things. If I start a movie, I'll watch it to the end, even if it's rubbish, just so you know what rubbish is. So if I open a book and I've read 3 pages, unfortunately, I'm going to have to read it at the end. And I got into that, and I sort of thought, I trusted the fact that if it had worked for other people, it might work for me. But yeah, I looked down at them and I thought, I just can't do it. I can't leave them. It wasn't just the fact that they were in the middle of nowhere in France. It was the fact that there wasn't anyone else at that point who could have, loved them as much as I did. That's what it came down to. And they loved me, and they were there in front of me, the bond was too strong.
Obviously, you polarize people sometimes with your views, and you get a lot of trolling. Obviously, it's sort of impinged on your safety at times, your personal safety, which is something I can't really comprehend. What's it like being at the centre of that attention? It must be very difficult.
Yeah, I read it. Yeah, I read it all the time. And Charlotte will say to me, she started to say recently, you didn't ought to read it because it's ramped up. It's got worse and worse. It's getting worse literally every day, Um, and I think there's a multitude of reasons for that, but it definitely gets worse. And no, it doesn't. It honestly doesn't. That type doesn't impinge on me at all. If anything, I would say sometimes it perversely encourages me to try harder. So here's a case in point. The gates were blown up. There was a firebomb outside. They made a the car into a bomb. They blew it up outside, and the gates were burned down. And over there is a table that I've made from the burned gates. So the texture of the wood after the fire was beautiful, actually, iridescent, crinkled, and that. And so we very carefully cut them up, and I've made it into a table. I've had it set in resin, so it's robust, and I'm going to auction it to raise money, which I'll give to a charity, which will be in direct opposition to the people who are most likely to have blown up the dates.
That's incredible. What a wonderful way to look at
Yeah,
something.
yeah, you burn my gates down, that's fine. I'll turn it into a profit and make sure and make sure it, it goes back at you twice as hard. And that's it. So sometimes my reaction to it is the worst thing they can possibly do, actually, because in fact it's just fueling me to try harder. I'm not going to burn anyone's gates down, obviously. I'm not going to take on their methodology, but I'm just going to think, okay, if that's the way you want to play it, I'm going to be as creative and as imaginative, and I'm going to work really harder. I'll get up 15 minutes earlier, and I'll make sure that I do everything I can to, so that my side of that debate is effectively stronger. What is more frightening, I think, now is the orchestrated campaigns of hatred. So these aren't random trolls. This is a systemic part of our life where people are actively working to undermine your credibility, your integrity, your health, your ability to function professionally and personally. And I am undoubtedly, um, exposed to those sorts of campaigns. I tell you why I struggle with that because I don't really know yet how to deal with it. How do you go back against something which is that well strategized? That requires equal strategy. And again, it's designed to waste our time because if we have to deal with that, we're not doing something which we see as creative. I'm having to hold something back. So I'm expending energy on stopping something rather than being able to expend all my energy on starting something. And so I think that most of those campaigns are just about trying to grind campaigners like my life, into a standstill where we haven't got space to do anything that we really need to do. Yeah, that can be sort of sometimes a bit demoralizing. I'm just a normal bloke. Why do I have to wrap myself up in barbed wire? That is really unpleasant. I resent that. I've got to be very honest with you. I am just a normal bloke. I'm just campaigning for the benefit of wildlife and the environment. That's what I spend most of my time trying to do.
Have you ever thought about walking away from it all when
It's
it
not an
gets too
option.
much?
It's not an option. There is no option. We're in a position now that our species and our planet has never been in before. There are few people, it seems, who are prepared to stick their head above the parapet. They don't, or they're not sufficiently motivated. They're not sufficiently. Sounds like I'm bigging myself up. I'm not. But they're obviously not sufficiently courageous or robust or resilient. That's not a criticism of them, by the way. That's just the way they are. But I am robust and I am resilient and I am prepared to say what I think is right at a time when it needs to be said because I've been very fortunate in that I've been given a platform to be able to exercise my voice, and I must exercise that voice for good, whether it's educating people about what it's like to be autistic, or whether it's educating people as to the dangers of climate breakdown and biodiversity loss. I'm not the most famous person in the world. I have a relatively small voice compared to some, but at least I'm using it, and I have no, there's no, there's no option. There is no stop. You know, I'm
I think a lot of people would find that incredibly admirable. I don't think many people would be able to do the same as you. What you're going through and the sacrifices and the danger which you are putting yourself in, the sheer personal cost. I think a lot of people would have walked away, but you're remaining steadfast.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I think, one of the traits that seems to be relatively common in my form of autism is that, we have an aggravated sense of injustice. We don't like people getting away with things. We have a very defined sense of what is right and wrong. So therefore, if they're getting away with something that is wrong, we need to address it. And what I see is a lot of people who are trying at least to get away with things which are wrong at this critical point. And I'm confident because for me, in science we trust. I come from essentially a scientific background. I build my foundations for all of my arguments on science, not on speculation, not even on emotion. Emotion can be a great fuel, but it's not there to build the foundation. I'm interested in data. And in terms of my mental health, does it have an impact? Of course it does. Of course it does. You know, the sense of loss. I mean, I already go out into those woods and they're quieter than they were when I was a teenager when it comes to birdsong. I already have to look for things which would have been bumping into my face when I was a kid. You know, I've presided over a 68% decline in the world's wildlife since 1970. I was 9 years old. I've watched it, you know, get destroyed in front of my face. That brings me immeasurable sadness. It generates enormous anger. And in terms of my personal mental health, do you know, I have this recurring, it's not a fantasy, okay, it's a nightmare, but I, I, I don't know really how to describe it. But Megan is 28 years old. Um, I, I've got this fixation, it's like a mental tick, right? And that is that I don't know how she's going to die. Now, obviously, we always hope that our children, stepchildren, will outlive us. That's the way we want life to work. And and if that comes to fruition, if I die first, I hope that's the case. Obviously, um, I would like to have thought that she would be able to live a life maybe parallel to that I've had or my parents had. You know, she could be happy. She could, if she wanted to, she could raise a family. She could choose where to live. She could find employment. She'd have access to a health service that was functional. She could make sure that her kids could be properly educated. All the things that we kind of sort of taken for granted or whatever. But at the moment, I can't manifest a guarantee that any of that's going to be available to her. And then when I think about how she might die, how is she going to die? Is she going to drown? Is she going to burn? Is she going to starve? Is she going to get killed? Migrating from one part of the world from another? All of those things are feasible realities. I don't want to, I have obviously got to push back and do everything I can to prevent any of those being her legacy. Because at the moment, I have the ability to influence that in a very small way. I know it's a very small one, just one bloke, a tiny bloke on a big planet of 8 billion other people. But, you know, I can't give up if not for that one reason.